So to discuss all of the day's news, let's bring in Sabrina Siddiqui and Franco Ordoñez. Sabrina is a political reporter for The Guardian, and Franco is White House correspondent for McClatchy, D.C. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start out with the Sally Yates hearing, which I watch a lot of hearings. I'm sure you do too. I thought this hearing was fascinating. The way that it gave you a glimpse into not just the inner workings of the Justice Department, but also of this White House. What struck you, Sabrina?
Well, I think it was striking that this raised even more questions about what exactly the Trump White House knew with respect to Michael Flynn, and why did they not take action until roughly 18 days after Sally Yates had these initial conversations with Don McGahn. And essentially, she really put the ball in the Trump administration's court, which is to say that, you know, we were doing routine surveillance, as they do, of you know, the Russian ambassador, and it's up to, of course, the intelligence officials, if they want to unmask a particular individual, if they have reason to believe that there is suspicious activity. And clearly, you know, the White House has tried to protect Flynn throughout this process and still is insisting that this entire story is fake news. So I do think that it's going to lead to a lot more explanation on the part of the Trump administration.
Right, because she really, Franco, went step by step. First, I met with Don McGahn. I told him that Flynn was lying to the vice president. I explained what he was lying about. I explained how we knew this. Then he called me, said he wanted to meet again the next day. And one of the questions that he had was, why does the Justice Department care if one White House employee is lying to another White House employee? And so she had to sort of explain all over again, well, A, because he's lying to the vice president of the United States, who's then going out and lying to the country, and B, it's because it makes him vulnerable to blackmail, because if we know he's lying, surely the Russians know he's lying as well.
It was a major point. I mean, being blackmailed is a real concern. Obviously, it was Sally Yates and been brought up before. I think there was a lot of concern today, and as you pointed out, it really showed many points, concerns that Sally Yates and members of the administration have, particularly the Justice Department, obviously. And I think there's still so many questions that she was raising that were trying to come out, almost dribbling, but it was like, as you said, every 5 minutes there was like something new that came out, whether it was the blackmail, whether it was the travel ban. There was so much to learn today.
Right, and it wasn't like this was sort of a, you know, gray area. She basically came out and said, this guy, who is, you know, one of the most influential people in the government when it comes to foreign affairs, could be vulnerable to blackmail. So, Sabrina, why do you think, based on what we know so far, the White House essentially ignored those warnings from President Obama and Sally Yates until the Washington Post revealed these conversations between Flynn and Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador?
Well, that's what's remarkable about it, is that it took the Washington Post to actually disclose that Michael Flynn had lied to the sitting vice president for any action to be taken. And even then, there was a period of 4 days where initially, you will recall, Kellyanne Conway saying, well, Michael Flynn has the full confidence of the president, and it really took some time. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that President Trump, sees this entire investigation into Russian interference and any of the probe into communications between his aides or officials associated with this campaign and Russia as an attack on his legitimacy. And he has constantly taken this very personally, as if people are trying to deny that he actually did win the election fair and square, when in fact, you know, when it comes to certain individuals, there has been a pattern of communications. There has been no smoking gun at this point. It's obviously important to underscore there's been no evidence that there's actual collusion between Trump or his campaign and the Russian government, but the White House has been unable to really just sit back and let this investigation happen. And I think, again, it has to do with Trump and the way that he views, you know, even this probe and its right to actually take place.
It also sounds like there was a fair amount of mistrust, clearly, between the new administration and people who had been around from the previous administration, like Sally Yates. Even though she was a career prosecutor, she was not a political appointee, but she came to them with this information, and it sounds like there was a little bit of suspicion about whether she might have other motivations.
I think there was a lot of of suspicion. You take, what we learned about the travel ban, and the White House is actually instructing the Office of Legal Counsel not to inform her about the travel ban and the discussion about that. So I think there was much deliberate information that was kept from Sally Yates and others. And you played the clip from Sean Spicer's briefing today. I mean, he was ready for that question. He was attacking right away. If Obama didn't want to give, if Obama had concerns about Michael Flynn, why didn't he raise them while he was in office? Why didn't he take away those security clearances?
She was really grilled by Republicans in this hearing about why she didn't back President Trump's travel ban, and she was very open about the fact that she was fired over it, even as she was meeting with the White House counsel about the Flynn matter. Let's take a listen to some of what she had to say about the events that led up to her firing.
All I can say is that I did my job the best way I knew how. I looked at this EO, I looked at the law, I talked with the folks at the Department of Justice, gathered them all to get their views and their input, and
she ended up deciding that the travel ban was unconstitutional and that she couldn't support it, and obviously the administration took a very different view. I want to switch gears here and talk a little bit about health care and the way forward on health care. Sabrina, what would the White House like to see happen now that the bill is in the Senate's court? What do they think about all this talk from senators from across the political spectrum, moderates and conservatives, basically saying, thank you very much, House of Representatives. We'll be putting our own bill together.
Well, I think that the Senate has to deal with the limitations of using what's known as the budget reconciliation process, which means that they're trying to pass a bill ultimately with a simple majority vote. And to get 51 senators around one piece of legislation, especially on a contentious issue like health care, means they are going to have to do away with a lot of the controversial provisions that were in the House bill. So they can't have such drastic cuts, for example, to Medicaid. And they can't have language that seems targeted at defunding or limiting funds toward Planned Parenthood. Already, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, both moderate Republican senators, have said that that's a non-starter for them. And so you're just going to see, I think, an easier path forward for Senate Republicans to start drafting their own language and maybe take elements of the House bill. It's important to note, though, and this is a story that the Huffington Post, or HuffPost as they're now called, broke today, that Mark Meadows, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, is actually having conversations with that working group in the Senate. So people might not want to necessarily overstate the differences between the two chambers. Clearly, as we saw last week, they are very adamant that they do want to pass something.
Right, especially because Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are not on that working group, and you do have folks like Ted Cruz, who also had big problems with the House bill, but because he and others like Rand Paul felt that it didn't go far enough to eliminate all of the vestiges of Obamacare. This is not going to be an easy process.
It's not going to be an easy process. And the White House is depending on Senator Cruz and others, and with his viewpoint, that they're going to be able to bring the other Republicans over to a more conservative side. I mean, it really shows, you played the Susan Collins clip, it really shows kind of like the difference between the two chambers. I think a lot of Republicans, particularly moderate Republicans like Susan Collins, are very worried about having kind of like that Mission Impossible moment that was kind of displayed about that Rose Garden ceremony. It seems a little premature. If this doesn't come out, this could really hurt them. And I don't think many of the Senate Republicans want to be in that kind of same situation.
Right. I want to ask you both about the big news at the White House today about the Kushner family's business pitch in China, touting the family's connection to President Trump, promising visas to investors. What does this story mean for all of these ongoing questions about Jared Kushner's role in the White House, and how could that have happened?
Well, this has been an ongoing issue that I think has not gotten as much attention as it would have if it weren't for the sheer volume of news that we have coming out of the White House, where there's so many unanswered questions with respect to the Trump business empire, Kushner's own, business ties, and now them being in these positions of great power. So you have this, it's called a golden visa, where it's in part to attract foreign investment, and if investors pay $500,000 and more, then they can get a fast track for visas, green cards for themselves and their family members. And so for any even appearance that Jared Kushner's sister was deliberately invoking his name to suggest that that might be an option if they bought into their properties in New Jersey, that is just something that is highly problematic, and it would raise certainly legal questions that, again, I don't think that this White has been able to put to rest, and it would get a lot more attention, I think. I don't know how you feel if we didn't have so much news to follow every day.
It's like a big air horn going off in newsrooms across the country.
Right.
Give us some money. We have these special visas, and if you do this, we have really high connections in the White House, and you'll probably get that visa. I mean, every newsroom is going to be taking a close look at this. As Sabrina said, if it wasn't for the Sally Yates, if it wasn't for healthcare, if it wasn't for Flynn, this would be even more dramatic news. But it is a fascinating story.
It was interesting that the Kushner family took a very different approach than the Trump family might have taken. President Trump's way is never admit a mistake. In this case, the Kushner family pretty much fell on its sword, right, and said, we apologize, this shouldn't have happened.
I think it's like finally they're taking a little bit of PR 101 course. Let's admit to the issues and draft it. I think it's really fascinating how these steps could have though been taken so that this did not happen. It seemed like such a basic error that really could have been avoided.
Really? Yeah. Well, thanks so much, both of you, for joining me to talk about all of these topics. Sabrina, Siddiqui, Franco, Ordoñez, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Sure.